Major funding for this program has been provided by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Consolidated, Douglaston Development, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Stephen Napolitano, First American Title Insurance Company, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Grubb and Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Markham, LLP, Marcus and Millichap Real Estate Investment Services, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Meridian Capital Group, The Moynihan Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, Siami Development, Inc., SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Inc., RAL Companies and Affiliates, LLC, Spandrel Property Services, Urban American.
I got to look at my Apple. I really don't know what's going to happen for 2011. So I brought together 4 of the brightest, the most astute individuals to provide their insight on where they see the real estate market in 2011. My guests today include Joseph Ficalora, the chairman, the president, and CEO of New York Community Bancorp; Jeffrey Levine, the chairman and CEO of Douglaston Development and Levine Builders; Kenneth Bernstein, the president and CEO of Arcadia Realty Trust; and last but definitely not least, Stephen Ross, the chairman and CEO of the related companies and also the owner of the Miami Dolphins. So, Stephen, where do you see the year going?
2011.
2011 is the question.
Well, I think there's very little new construction that has been built over the last couple of years. So I think that the rental markets will do well. They'll continue to increase because of the scarcity of supply. I don't think there'll be a lot of new construction going forward. We'll absorb a lot of the condominiums that were unsold, and rents will continue to increase.
You know, there's the proposal was in the Journal talking and the potential tax changes that people will not be able to get interest deduction for mortgages. Do you think that's going to have an effect on condominium sales?
I mean, that'll have some impact on condominium sales. I think there'll be very little new condominiums built in New York in 2011, because there is no more 421A, and I don't think banks will make construction loans without the tax abatements that were afforded buyers in the past.
So that leads to a perfect. I have a small banker, who has a $41.7 or $42 billion bank, who's lent. Would you lend without a 421A?
The New York market is definitely a strong market to lend into, and without a 421A, we would lend. And we've lent through many different cycles over the course of the last several decades. So the likelihood that we're going to be there even when the situation further deteriorates is very high.
So today, if someone came to you, someone sitting here or somebody who's an established builder who has equity, skin in the game, you would lend on a construction loan?
Yeah, as long as there was enough equity in the game.
So what's
And what's that?
what's that, Joe? Come on.
It's always a matter of what we're talking about. What is actually the property, and who is the party.
But the interesting thing is, and people don't realize, you've in the past, you have a $650 million loan on your books to Co-op City, right?
Actually, the loan is about 484 million.
Okay.
But Co-op City's worth a lot more than 480.
That's a rental property, that, you know, for
Yeah,
affordable
that's right.
housing, basically.
It's-
So
it's-
it's a total different market than you're talking about new condominiums
Right.
in the city.
Yeah, but
usually
but you did, Matt. You remember when we spoke about a year ago? You lent on West End Avenue on that project. You're part of the syndicate
Yeah.
over there. You felt
Yeah,
comfortable,
yeah.
and I know.
And we are considering other significant, loans into the 11
And it's
year.
interesting because Stevens Company has that great property, on in the west side, like 76th Street, and you wanted to lend to the property next door, but the family decided to do it all cash.
Right. Well, that was a great loan too, because they had a huge amount of equity in it. They were definitely going to go forward, and they have on their own.
Yeah, there's
Well,
no
one of the
que-
big problems is when you some of the larger projects. In the past, you needed syndicates to put them together, and banks aren't going to form syndicates too much going forward, and that's a big problem. So how do you really find loans and put together packages for the large projects?
But there is this little bank called Bank of China who, just recently did an $800 million loan to Brookfield. Bank of China this year has done probably, in 2010, probably lent over $1.5 billion. They did S.L. Green's building in Times Square. They've done a couple of buildings.
Those are all existing, buildings. But we're talking about, if you're talking about construction loans, you're talking about existing buildings. I mean, there's a lot of money available for existing buildings today to refinance them.
But as we were talking prior to the show, 2011, 2012, a lot of these securitization loans come up. What happens then? Ken?
Well, I think a fair amount of debt's maturing over the next couple of years, both securitization and otherwise. The market's healthier, so I would expect to see a fair amount of those loans not simply just get extended. I think that the securitization market's going to get smarter about how to work through those transactions. There's a lot of equity. We're sitting on a lot of equity to help restructure those as well. So I think you'll see a fair amount of transaction activity surrounding both the maturing securitization market.
Here's a question with regard to securitization, and I'd like anyone, a little discussion is better than me being the questionnaire. The securitization market has never taken any skin in the game. Now, there are plans that in March of 2011 that there's going to be a discussion that the securitization entity may have to take a 5% piece of the deal.
Very, very complicated. We would spend the balance of the show talking about the granularity of that. What you're seeing without those changes is a securitization market starting to reform, fairly similar to how it used to look, and we'll all have to think through what that means, including the investors.
So what happens when the securitization market goes back into their crazy life?
Well, if it actually occurs that there are no new restrictions on how securitizations occur, there's going to be a significant amount of increase in available funding, which I guess would be good for everybody that wants to buy, and it'll add to the potential values of real estate, generally speaking. But there's a real possibility that the realization that most of the losses that are already in the marketplace are from securitized lending, and therefore, as that becomes more unavoidable for the Congress or the regulator, because they're both still in this game, they're both continuing to play. The concept that, for example, they would do something about the tax deduction on real estate is exactly the wrong thing to do, since the greatest risk to this economy is that real estate
housing market
continues to devalue, and they've done multiple things that adversely affect real estate. Not necessarily, the real estate here in New York, but certainly housing in particular around the country, and it has an
But
impact
the lack
on
of
all real estate.
deductibility of home
Absolutely.
interest is most important at the higher rate districts on the east and the west coast.
Correct.
So the areas that have held up here in New York would be greatly impacted, and I don't think that would be beneficial for our economy as a whole.
It definitely would not, because it would be taking out of the economy spendable dollars. And think of it this way. all money that goes into the tax coffers is actually reducing debt. It's not being spent, it's reducing debt, which means it's reducing the viability of the economy, because the economy needs spendable money. So when you have an appreciating economy, real estate's going up, and you monetize that, you have significant amounts of money available to be spent on all things. When you're in the opposite position, where values are coming down, you in fact decrease the likelihood that the economy is going to expand, that you're going to have jobs or whatever. When you increase taxes in this environment, you virtually take out of the economy spendable dollars, because the government is spending money that they don't have, which means that they're spending more than the dollars they take out. So every dollar they take out is just money that is not available to a bank or an equity fund or anybody that otherwise would have been able to spend that money.
You know, prior to the show, we were talking about, you know, Steve is going to develop the Hudson Yards, and you were talking about tenants and the changes in the accounting rules. The tenants will probably, because of the capitalization, want to own strong tenants would want to own their property.
Well, I mean, their accounting rules will provide that they'll be indifferent if they own or if they lease. So if you can lock in space and own it and not worry about future rent increases or what landlords might do in providing services, you know, I think there would be a strong movement to large corporations looking to own their own space.
I mean, today, large corporations in New York, you know, at one time, you know, Pfizer owned their property, so they sold one of the buildings. You know, the deal hasn't closed yet, but there is the story that Google is going to buy 111 8th Avenue, right, which will provide them with large space over there. Right. But if you look at it this way, Verizon, which was one of the entities, and Con Ed sold all the property that they used to own. You know, just in that aspect.
I think you have a lot of corporations today that are spread out around the city, and one, want to consolidate a lot of their holdings, and two, a lot of the existing supply is very old, you know, and somewhat obsolete. And today, to try and renovate in place is a very, very difficult and expensive thing. So I think, like, we're very optimistic with the Hudson Yards, where we can provide them with modern, state-of-the-art facilities, where we give them the option of owning it. That I think it'll be very attractive to corporations looking for new space, you know, that'll meet today's needs.
Now, relating to the Hudson Yards, Jeff has a rental building, a beautiful building called the Ohm, which is on 30th and what, 10th? 11th. Now, right now, you don't have any true amenities over there. When the Hudson Yards is built, there's going to be how much retail?
There'll probably be somewhere between 750 and 1 million square feet of retail.
Well,
There's a lot of public space. I mean, there'll be a tremendous amount of amenities. The High Line will be extended, you know, from where it is today to close to 34th Street, so that it'll really be a very active, vibrant community. But that's still a ways off.
Well, I anxiously await everything related is going to do with the West Side Yards for the city and for my project in general. Currently, we are not so isolated, because we have the good fortune of really being associated with the West Chelsea and the Lower Meatpacking District via the High Line, which is actually going to open up at the corner of 30th Street and 10th Avenue with access this spring. So we're not as isolated. Obviously, the future looks great with the West Side Yards and Hudson Yards developments coming. But I think in general, that West Chelsea area is already here to stay.
What about retail? Let's talk here. I don't want to talk about the country. Urban retail seems really strong. I mean, you know, I did a show a couple of weeks ago. The retailers said that, you know, things are very bright. Everybody wants to be in Times Square. Everyone wants to be throughout the city. What are you seeing?
New York is different than almost every other part of the country in that it is vibrant, because the economy overall is still tepid at best. We're seeing international retailers, national retailers continuing to want to penetrate. And fundamentally, we went into the recession in the 5 boroughs under-retailed. It's probably the only part of the country that you could say that. So as we have worked through the recession, we're seeing retailers find good positive same-store growth, opportunities to expand into an urban market that they had not effectively penetrated over the past 10 years or so. So it's working, and I think it'll continue as the economy gets
Well,
better.
what do we see about with regard to Lower Manhattan? I mean, you have a very successful rental building that you've owned for a number of years in Tribeca. We know that the trade center is being built. We know that certain other things, there are a couple of new hotels, more than a couple, opened up. What's your thoughts about Lower Manhattan in 2011, 2012?
Well, I mean, there's been so much money spent and being spent. I always say in real estate, always follow the money and you'll follow where growth will be. So I think Lower Manhattan certainly is an area I think will continue to grow. As New York City, I think, will continue to grow. I think what goes on at the World Trade Center site, I think, will take some time. They're under construction now, and it's going to take a long time for that to be rebuilt. But if you look at Lower Manhattan, it's the place where everybody wants to be. The young people today, that's where all the housing is being built. So I think it will become much more of a vibrant area. I still think, the Hudson Yards is certainly a lot better location, but that's beside the point.
Joe, as a banker, how do you look at Lower Manhattan? And then also, I want to leave I want Lower Manhattan, and I want to look at the boroughs. How do you see 2011 for Lower Manhattan? And so on?
I think all of Manhattan is going to do very well in 11. And certainly even the boroughs are likely to continue to do well.
Yeah.
The comments you were making earlier, Steve, about consolidation of operations, we're consolidating about 200,000 square feet, but we're going to do it in Nassau. So there's no question this is a time that companies that are affiliated or located in the New York market are going to take the opportunity to own, and to own a single entity rather than to be dispersed.
So you're going to put...
We're going to bring together everything that we have into a single location. It has to exceed 200,000 square feet as of right now.
Yeah, but there aren't that many 200,000 square feet locations in Nassau. There are more possibilities in Suffolk,
Yeah,
if you will.
We really don't want to go that far out. I mean, obviously, closer to New York City is better than further from New York City for our purposes. That's where our people are, by the way.
Now, you're in Williamsburg. What's happening in that hip neighborhood over there in Williamsburg?
Well, as we discussed before, Williamsburg is a destination of choice for many of the younger people, Generation X and Y. The society, the culture, the amenities, the bars, the galleries. It's what the young people want in their lives.
I haven't seen a New York Community Bank there yet.
The reality is that, the L train intersects with all of the north-south means of transportation in Manhattan, so it's good access to employment, which is very important, whether it be downtown, midtown, or in Brooklyn. On the rental level, we've seen incredible rentals on the affordable housing, which is something we focused on greatly over these last few years, because in an environment where it's very difficult to finance new construction because of the questions the banks have about the future of the rental markets here in New York City, affordable housing with the level of subsidy and tax abatement, as Steve alluded to before, make it very viable. So the affordable rents off the charts in the boroughs without question. The market rate in Brooklyn, we're seeing rents in Williamsburg that are approaching $50 a foot, which I did not believe I would see at this time, but it is actually happening.
That has been confirmed to me in a number of properties. Anything close to the L train is
correct.
Very hot.
To go a step further, the for sale market continues because of the lack of availability of financing that existed 3 and 4 years ago. The for sale market continues to exist, but at a much lower pace than previously. Again, real estate, though, is a function of the economy, and while it appears by every indication that the general economy is improving, that the stock market continues to afford confidence to people, I think you'll see the pent-up demand, which we absolutely have here in New York City, for residential housing for purchase, come back to the market this spring if the economy continues to sustain itself at lower price points than existed 2 and 3 years ago, but at acceptable price points for existing construction, and eventually growth will come back.
You have a property, the 42nd Street, the massive property over there. You have sales and rentals, correct?
Right.
So what do you think the units will sell for in that market in a range?
Probably $1,500 a foot.
Well, which will be a high price for that neighborhood right now.
Well, they'll be the top of the building. The views
Right.
will be incredible, and it'll be a good product. I mean, there's virtually no new construction going to go on, or very little in Manhattan. So, and I think as supply has been absorbed, you're going to do well. This is the laws of supply and demand.
No question. Ken, where do you see the next for retail? Because, Sheepshead Bay, Canarsie, you've been in. I don't hear Williamsburg. I don't.
Well, but downtown Brooklyn, and
downtown Brooklyn.
To touch on what Jeff was talking about, we've started what'll be 1.5 million square foot development, and because we started it, we've locked into the 421A benefits for both the 500,000 square feet of retail that we'll be doing, as well as the
So what's the
up to
first
1 million
phase?
square feet.
What's the first phase? Because I know you're building right now. You got the federal funding on that. Didn't you get a
Right.
federal
So
grant?
the first phase is going to be relatively small on Fulton Street, which is about 50,000 square feet of retail. But we hope to start within the next year with 1 or 2 major anchors that hopefully 2011, if you look at your Apple, it'll tell you who our retailers will be.
I have a strange idea who
Right.
who the retailers are.
So with that, plus the ability to build up to close to 1 million square feet of residential in multiple phases, and it's as likely as not that we won't be the residential developer of that. But it's been amazing to see the transformation just over the past couple of years in downtown Brooklyn. On Fulton Street, you have H&M opening, Aeropostale, Shake Shack, the 3 new hotels, 4,000 new residential units for sale or rental. It's becoming a 24/7 community.
And it's very interesting because when when Ratner built on DeKalb, I thought it would have been difficult for him to rent, and he leased it all up. And Ronnie Hackett's 50-story Brooklyner has been leased up, and the condo sales have been still slow in downtown Brooklyn.
Right.
I mean, the Oro had problems. The BE, they had to recapitalize the situation. But it's a great example. I've been in the Bronx, for a couple of Yankee games, and also doing. I mean, what you have done up in the Bronx is unbelievable this year. In the last couple of years, how are they doing?
I mean, we're doing very well there. I mean, but then you have the problems of the Bronx. I mean, when they stopped our project at Kingsbridge, I mean, that's a problem that the city, and city council is debating that could be disastrous for New York. And so I mean, we can talk all the bright spots, and then you think about, here the Bronx with the highest unemployment, and no jobs good enough,
No, but I mean, but the other property, what you've done right near the stadium is.
The Bronx Terminal Market is doing
Terminal Market is fantastic.
Oh yeah, there's certainly a pent up demand for good retail in all the boroughs.
I mean, I think a good example is, Costco originally had some difficulty at East River Plaza. I always like going to see I walked into Costco, I walked into Target. They're doing very well in East River Plaza, and they're even opening up a second Applebee's in Harlem, right next door on the pad over there. So that was an interesting market. What about you? You've financed properties up in Harlem. What do you see in the boroughs and the suburban
The boroughs
market?
and Manhattan. There are plenty of good properties that have cash flows that justify their loans. But a lot of the stuff that's going to ultimately come to the market is going to come to the market at a lot lower price than it was financed 5 years ago or 6 years ago or even 4 years ago. So that stuff is kind of in the wings, getting unraveled.
You know something I haven't brought up, and I don't want, we are regional and other things. You have branches in New Jersey. What do you see about New Jersey? The office market in New Jersey is terrible. The only one who makes money on that is the broker putting somebody from one building to another. The residential hasn't done that well, with the exception of Hoboken and Jersey City. What do you see? What's your thoughts about Jersey?
We have branches there, and that is a source of deposits. We're not doing that much lending in New Jersey now. I mean, I'd much rather be in New York than be in New Jersey in real estate.
I mean, you can't forget. Look, real estate is dependent upon job growth,
Right.
and we're not having job growth. So you can't expect real estate to all of a sudden do well, without the job growth. And Jersey's not getting job growth. New York City has held on to its jobs. I mean, it's starting to come back for those that are lost, but we haven't had great job growth from the peak. In fact, we haven't had any.
No,
We
but the
have
good
a
news
reduction.
for New York City is
What?
that while we haven't had the great job growth, we also haven't had population loss, which people still have to continue to live here because the possibilities of gaining employment are far greater here than they are in the rest of the country.
So here's my question. I have like 2 minutes left. How do you see 2011, 2012 going around? You first and Joe last.
Well, from owning real estate, I think we'll do a lot better in terms of the rents and the occupancies we have. In terms of doing a lot of new construction, I don't see a lot of that happening.
Ken?
Owning will be good, and I think it'll be fun, finally, to be involved in transactions. I think you're going to see a fair amount of activity as a lot of this debt comes due and the deleveraging process occurs.
Jeffrey?
Rental housing, I agree completely with Steve. The rental market continues to be strong. And I think with an improving economy, the for-sale residential market will see a resurgence as well.
Joe?
The market will be very strong. The people in this room will be able to borrow money to buy what will be sold at a discount, because there's an awful lot of stuff that's going to come to the market in 11 that'll be well below where, in fact, it was originally financed.
Do you see,
So
just
that's a lot of opportunity to buy.
Just as a quick aside, do you see any of, you know, there had been a lot of banks taken over this year, and I haven't seen any in the last couple of months. Do you see before the end of?
Before the end of the year?
Yeah.
Well, before the end of the year, there'll only be small banks taken over. What you saw with Wilmington Trust will happen much more frequently in the period ahead, where the FDIC nudges to the door banks that do not get taken over, but do get forced to sell.
So you
So
mean
we've
like
had a couple of those
I mean
now.
like Wilmington Trust, like
Wilmington Trust, Smithtown.
Bank of Smithtown, and
Right.
so on.
Right.
Right. So.
So there'll
So-
be more of that.
So on the average, you're saying my apple is going to be polished and seems a little better, but that's for our region. It doesn't mean for the nation in general, correct?
Well, the nation will be much worse.
Okay, I'd like to thank Joe Ficalora, Jeffrey Levine, Ken Bernstein, and Stephen Ross. See you next week.
Major funding for this program has been provided by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Consolidated, Douglaston Development, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Stephen Napolitano, First American Title Insurance Company, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Grubb and Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Joffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Markham, LLP, Marcus and Millichap Real Estate Investment Services, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Meridian Capital Group, The Moynihan Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, Siami Development, Inc., SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Inc., RAL Companies and Affiliates, LLC, Spandrel Property Services, Urban American.